History in the PCUSA of Divestment. And Dan or Rob, which of you wants to try that first?
I'll take a stab. The history of divestment of the PCUSA is older than I am. Started before the PCUSA started, back when we were still the northern and southern streams. And the church, at some point in its history, and I don't have the exact date, said we're not going to invest in a few categories of companies: alcohol-producing companies, tobacco companies, firearms and weapons companies. And I think at some point, I don't know if it's formal, but for a while we have not invested in gambling companies either. Then fast forward to just after the PCUSA came together in the early 80s, the campaign around South Africa. And those first sets were what we talk about as categorical divestment, where we take a category of stocks and screen those out of our investments. In the early 80s, when the campaign against apartheid in South Africa was going on, the General Assembly said, we need to have a more serious policy about how we take on divesting from different stocks or use this as a tactic. And so they developed a very thoughtful policy on what's called phase selective divestment. And this says we're going to look at a particular set of companies, we're going to engage with them using our stocks that we hold in them as leverage. We're going to talk to them about specific goals, and if we are not making progress with them, then as a last resort, we will divest from them. And that threat of divestment is one of the tools that can help motivate those conversations to happen. We've used phase selective divestment with some impact in the South Africa campaign. We've used it in other human rights campaigns. We've used it most recently. Many of you are familiar with the vote taken by the last assembly to divest from Motorola, Caterpillar, and HP over issues of profiting from the occupation in the West Bank and Gaza. So that's the phase selective divestment that you also hear about. So it's a tool that we have used. We have, I think, about 60 companies on that phase selective list right now. Those also include for-profit prisons and a couple of others. So, Dave, you want to add to that?
One interesting point to make about the early days, we never did formally divest as a denomination from alcohol. So rest comfortably that when you go home and have a beer tonight, it's okay, because the Presbyterian Church has not divested from alcohol, but we hold very little holdings in alcohol, primarily because that's sort of byproduct from the socially responsible investment companies that our investment vehicles that our money managers have invested in. Basically, a lot of that's been driven by the Baptists and other denominations that really don't want alcohol as part of their portfolios either. So we end up inheriting that because those are the funds that we invest in. Which brings up one of the real problems behind phased selective divestment. Cam, we've kind of bled into the next question. I think that's probably okay. Phased selective divestment is great in theory, but very difficult to implement in practice. The most recent time, as Rob alluded to, was Motorola, Caterpillar, and Hewlett-Packard at the most recent General Assembly. That took 10 years to negotiate and has not resulted in divestment. And that's the thing that's really frustrating. Even though MRTI can say, yes, we should divest, there is no vehicle whereby we can divest. Because in the same way that we got alcohol divestment for free, because it was part of the portfolios, until all the portfolios in which the Board of Pensions and the Foundation invests also choose to divest specifically from Motorola, Caterpillar, and Hewlett-Packard, we still own them, in spite of what we've said. So there's a little bit of inconsistency going on when we say, yes, we as the Presbyterian Church have divested from these specific stocks. We really haven't. The Board of Pensions owns $12 million right now in those funds and has no plan or mechanism whereby they can divest. So if MRTI were to decide tomorrow that ExxonMobil is a bad actor because they've been hiding what they've known about climate change from us for the last 40 years, they still have no vehicle whereby they could specifically divest just from ExxonMobil. So we've got some problems here.
I think if this panel was going to agree on everything.
I need to respond to that a little bit, and I can't speak for the Board of Pensions, I can only speak for the foundation, but we did divest our shares of the 3 companies.
Your directly held shares.
Yes, our directly held shares. That is the other point that was not really covered in the question, but there are kind of two ways that the foundation or the board or other organizations can hold shares. We can hold them directly, where we purchase shares of stock in a particular company, or we can hold them in what's called a commingled vehicle. If you think of your mutual funds, those are commingled vehicles, where you're not out there picking the particular stocks. You're saying to Vanguard, I want to buy shares of this fund, and you pick the stocks. And your shares in that are mixed with a lot of other people's investments. Those are the ones that Dan is saying are harder to do, to manage. We try to have as many of our commingled vehicles as possible to have direct insight into what is in those. And we at the foundation try to monitor those for any of the stocks that are in the categories we've talked about or that are on the list that we've talked about. And we tell our managers to try to avoid those stocks. If we set a budget, we say, we understand that we cannot be perfect. We are fallen people, we are fallen institutions, but we want to be as close to perfect as we can. So we look every quarter at what's in all of those funds, and we give ourselves a budget of about 3% of our investments. We say, as long as we are under 3%, we are 97% pure on these, we're doing pretty well. For the last several years, we've been less than 1% have fallen into any of the categories that we monitor. So we are more than 99%.